here. Bill, you're good to go.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thanks to the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, and special shout out to Jackie and Mona and the rest of the leadership at the Cancer Survivor Network to be hosting and supporting events like these and webinars like these. And of course, to all the people who have dialed in, we've got 48 attendees on the line, and many more will probably be joining shortly. And as Allison, you said in the intro, I know we're in a recording now. Many of the people on the line are going to have an opportunity to be in Edmonton at the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health annual symposium just in a couple weeks' time. So hopefully what we're going to walk through and talk through today is going to be a little bit of a taster for the kind of opportunities that you'll learn more about in Edmonton, because CADTH always puts on an excellent conference with opportunities to bring maybe some questions that we don't get in or out today. You'll have an opportunity to pose those and interact with people from CADTH and the rest of the ecosystem there. So today we're going to be talking about CADTH's work on patient engagement and patient input to the different programs at CADTH. And we have a special guest in addition to the CADTH patient engagement officer, somebody with lots of experience with patient input and the expert committees that we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to move on really briefly to introduce our guest panelists. So Sarah Berglas is the patient engagement officer with CADTH, and she works with and supports 140 patient groups to provide their perspectives on CADTH's drug reviews and programs. She also works with researchers and patients to find new approaches to integrating lived experiences and expectations for new treatments into our health technology assessments. In addition to publishing and writing in peer-reviewed journals, she has 18 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and healthcare communications world in both private and public sectors. And honestly, the patient community is very fortunate to have somebody like you, Sarah, to be able to call, because some of this is traditionally being viewed as a black box. And you've heard me talk about this. Patients are told to go look at the product monograph and then talk about it. I think that you're gonna help translate some of that for maybe some new patient groups that haven't been able to write in. So hopefully today's opportunity will be a chance for even more patient groups to get involved. Sarah is joined with me by Maureen Smith, and many of you know Maureen. I think, Maureen, you've done one of these webinars, at least one or two in the past with the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. Maureen has over 30 years of experience as an educator, and when she's not helping kids succeed in school and in life, her interest in patient advocacy is really her passion. You know, she's been living with a rare disorder since the age of 8, and has a long history of active collaboration with the medical research community. I'll let Maureen maybe briefly tell her story there, but she's been on research ethics panels. She's the secretary of on the board of directors of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, and that's where I really got to know you, Maureen, quite a few years ago on that board. She's been involved in the Drug Information Association's annual meeting, and I could go on. Perhaps most relevant to this session, Maureen has served on the Ontario Committee to Evaluate Drugs as a patient member since 2014. Probably the longest serving patient member on an expert committee in Canada. There's maybe somebody else that has a beard that has served longer. But we'll figure that out afterwards. We'll get the hockey cards with the stats on the back going. So these are our guest panelists. I just want to situate briefly where we're going to talk about where patient input to CADTH sort of fits in the whole review and funding system in Canada. So each of these platforms, and some of you on the line have probably seen them, are evaluation stages or reimbursement decision stages for a new medicine coming to Canada. And each of the platforms, starting with Health Canada, is actually encouraging more and more patients to get involved and to provide their input on what's important for them in prioritization. And we've actually had one of our previous webinars with the Survivor Network was on the great things that CADTH is trying to coordinate with Health Canada, and that was a way to make sure that there's streamlined input early and even earlier access than what we're seeing today. The public health technology assessment stage happens often in parallel with the final few months of the Health Canada review, and so you'll get the NOC or the drug will be available on the market, and usually between 3 and 4 months later, CADTH will come out with its recommendation to fund or not fund the drug, and CADTH makes those recommendations to the public drug programs, and I'll let Sarah explain that a little bit more. Those recommendations are relied upon by the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, which are all the governments in Canada who jointly negotiate the listing terms or the funding terms for a new medicine. And I often ask people who are around that table, do you have a binder that includes the patient input from before? And maybe we can talk a bit about how and whether some of that input actually gets down to them deciding at that level, is this a priority for their drug plans? I don't know if we're going to get to that, but that's a question I always have. From there, they actually get listed on the public drug formularies and the hospital formularies across the country, and then we've got patients down at the bottom. Of course, the private payer system is on the right there. They have their own health technology assessment bodies or review systems as well, and some of them are actually making reference to CADTH's work. So increasingly, what we're going to talk about today is of growing importance to patient access, and we're going to learn about why and how the formal and other input from patients and participation is making a huge difference on whether you can actually move from the top panel to the bottom and get access to new health technologies. We should also say that there are the national, or I should have said pan-Canadian processes that Sarah is going to talk about in terms of the Common Drug Review and the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review for cancer medicines. But there are formal processes or opportunities for provincial input. So in BC, there's a Your Voice program, relatively wide open in terms of who can write in from the stakeholder perspective on that. Ontario has the Committee to Evaluate Drugs, and maybe Maureen can touch briefly on the work that she does with that committee. But there is a formal separate patient input opportunity for Ontario. Quebec has and Ines has a stakeholder input opportunity that actually looks a lot like what CADTH is doing. Is you've got increasing coordination between Ines and CADTH, with some important differences, like for all drugs, healthcare professionals, for example, can write in through that one input opportunity. As I said before, briefly, hospitals and private payers have some opportunities for patient input, usually less formal. There are patient ombudspersons in some hospitals and institutions that are good conduits to talk about things like access, because they have their own formularies and drugs and therapeutics committees that they run to decide. So with that, I just wanted to sort of situate us both geographically and in terms of where in the flow chart CADTH sits. And now I'm going to pass it over to our special guest from CADTH. And thank you again, Sarah, for coming today.
Well, thank you very much, Belf, and Cancer Survivor Network for inviting me to come and talk. I just want to begin with a disclosure that I am an employee of CADTH, and CADTH is funded by federal, provincial, and territory ministries of health. And I'm sure many people listening on the call today are involved in the webinar are very aware of opportunities in the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review and also the Common Drug Review. But I just wanted to use this slide to highlight the range of different activities that CADTH does and our products and services. And I'll be talking a little bit about ways that patients as individuals or part of patient groups can be involved in all of these different areas. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the timing of this webinar is just wonderful. It just ties in well with our symposium, but also over the last few months, I've spent a lot of time with others on the team and at CADTH, pulling together all the different activities and opportunities that we have at CADTH for patients to be involved in our work. And we've posted this new materials on our website to be able to explain some of those opportunities. So I'm going to go through a little bit through these opportunities now of what we have. The first of all, I just wanted to highlight why should patients be involved in work that CADTH is doing. Well, first of all, we realize that patients and their families have got really valuable lived experiences that contribute to the evidence base of our assessments. So that's a fundamental reason. Also, patients, families, the communities, they can offer insights and diversity of needs in different healthcare settings. And then also, our recommendations, they're on publicly funded devices and medicines. We're giving recommendations and advice to publicly funded health authorities and hospitals. And our work impacts Canadian patients. So it makes a lot of sense to have patients and the public have an understanding and awareness of what we're doing and to be able to be involved. So I'll move along to the different opportunities. So in addition to our drug assessments, that second bullet there, we also do around about 300 increases each year, rapid responses. So that's where if your health authority or hospital has a question, they can come to CADTH, we'll do an evidence search and do a critical appraisal of what's found, and that information is public. So that's something that, just wanted to highlight that it's freely available. We often have patients come across CADTH via Google, finding one of these assessments, and that's something that you can read. It's balanced reporting on benefits and harms. It's something you can print out, take with your family physician, talk to your specialist, talk to your family, and to be able to be informed as to what's available and what are the pros and cons. Also, there are reference lists often in those that you can learn more studies, and public libraries can help be a way to access those information. So we're aware of our drug assessments. We also do a number of scans and larger projects.
I have to say, Sarah, the rapid reviews are, and just to reinforce what you said, are really well written for often a layperson to understand quickly. So as opposed to, or potentially in contrast to some of the detailed CADTH recommendations through CDR and pCODR, I find that the rapid response is a really good program to get a quick understanding and really, not to say that the other ones you're going to talk about aren't, it's just they're more compact and so a little bit easier to get.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I'll take that back to the team of researchers involved in that. So, of course, the annual symposium, that's another great way that people who are interested in devices, technology, can learn about it at CADTH. So, of course, it's great to be able to come to the symposium in person, and CADTH has travel grants, a limited number of travel grants, but to help get patients there. But we also have those proceedings, the plenaries, available on YouTube. You can have a look at past plenary sessions and some of our others. We webinar. And using social media, too, is a great way to get a sense of, what are people's reactions to what is being presented there, and to be able to chime in and add comment. We really have been, last fall, encouraging patients and patient groups to submit an abstract. And Maureen, thank you for being involved in our webinar that we had encouraging patients and patient groups to submit. In response to that, this year we had 25 patient groups or patients submit abstracts to the conference. And we also would like to have different individuals as lay, reviewers join the abstract review committee so that the material that is presented at the conference, it does have a whole range of viewpoints contributing to developing that program. We've got a number of patient groups involved in posters, panels, presentations, and again, Maureen, this year is going to be one of our plenary speakers, so thank you very much. And we also, at the first night of the conference, just before the poster session, before it kicks off, we have an informal gathering. So people who are involved in the patient community can meet and get a sense of who else is going and all the different people that are there. So we've run that for the last few years and we'll continue to do so. So this is a great way, and certainly this is a place where lots of new ideas that come, you know, that you'll see developed in future years. This is where a lot of them gem and are talked about. So it's really great to have diversity of voices be part of that discussion and hearing those, and often patients have different perspectives that are really valuable for everybody who's there. Moving along, so this is different from input, and it's something I kind of wanted to highlight, is that CADTH often has stakeholder feedback opportunities. This is both for organizations, but also individuals who want to comment both on processes, but also a lot of our bigger reports will have the draft protocols, we'll have draft, science reports, sometimes we'll have draft recommendations that we make available on the website for people to be able to comment, you know, a 2-week sort of window usually, to comment on, are there aspects that are missing, perspectives that are missing. So it's looking much more for feedback, but it's a great way to be aware of some of that process and organizational change.
Can I just support what you're saying too on the feedback? These are relatively open questions and opportunities to provide a perspective on a report or a protocol, as you said. It's actually nice as a stakeholder and somebody who's in the community to have that open opportunity to provide comment, as opposed to trying to make things really strict with specific questions. So I totally think that CADTH has got it right in terms of how it seeks that kind of feedback.
So thank you for that. And then, of course, here we have input, and I'm sure many people watching the webinar are aware of the input opportunities. So we have that for the Common Drug Review and the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review. We've also had that in the last year for a couple of larger projects, such as our CAR-T cell therapies, where patient groups have been able to provide input. Now, patient groups will use a whole range of different methods in developing their input, and all of these methods have got value, can offer different types of insights. So sometimes it's the patient group board, or it may be, especially with rare disease communities, a community of families who talk about their own lived experience, people who run support groups for members, they'll gather some of those experiences, as well as the surveys and as well as the interviews. And the groups comment on the disease, treatment expectations, and lived experience with the therapies that are around, and also the therapy under review. We use those experiences, so the perspectives offered by patients, by caregivers, clinicians, and some of that happens in different forms depending on the program, to really build our understanding of the trial data and how that trial data, may play out. Sometimes it's highlighting this is a significant gap in the trial data. This outcome was considered. Patient groups will say these are the really important outcomes for us, and we can look and go, were those outcomes included in the trial data? Were they not? Is there an evidence gap there? Oftentimes talking about experience of the disease and experience of current treatments helps to be able to look at the economic models and go, okay, how do the models, does that kind of resonate with what we're hearing from Canadian patients in terms of their experience with current therapies or the disease? And also often other insights that the clinical reviewers, the economic team, the members of the committee may not even be aware that they don't know that, there's a gap. So there are lots of different ways, different types of insights that really depend very much on the disease that's been looked at, the trial data that's been given, and the experience of those who are assessing that. I will comment that what is the outcome? Because that is something that is often asked. What is the outcome of contributing patient input to specific reviews? We try in our recommendations to be able to highlight, well, what were the key data? What did we hear from patient groups? And that looks a little different depending on the committee. And what were the discussion points? What were the areas of consideration? So in putting together the recommendation report, it tries to pull together all the information that was really deliberated upon during the deliberations. So that is something to be able to look at and try and tease out what were some of the key insights for this specific review at this specific time. Certainly say that we have the reviews, and then we have the committees do their deliberation, and they follow a deliberative framework or recommendation framework depending on the committee. And there are multiple aspects of information that go into that. So it's really tricky to be able to say, well, this one piece of information, redirected anything, especially when you have multiple members involved in a committee. Different things may have triggered certain members to vote certain ways when it comes to the vote. So it's kind of like saying, well, let's say we have a response rate. Well, that response rate alone is not enough to say, yes, let's fund this drug or not. It may depend on what's the impact of that response rate. How does that response rate compare to other treatments? How is the length of that? So in a kind of a nutshell, there is a great deal of information that goes into the deliberations. We try our best to track how each of that information came to the final decision, and that patient input is a really valuable part and is well appreciated. So thank you for all the groups who continue to put a lot of work in to be able to do that patient input. This is something that we often doesn't get as much kind of airtime as our patient input, and it's an area of development in CADTH. So for a lot of our projects, the larger projects, optimal use projects, health technology assessments, especially in the device space, we are looking to work with individuals using a more of a patient partner sort of model, to be able to have individuals help us developing the protocol, helping understand what the literature search, and often with these ones, we will do a search in the published literature and then a qualitative synthesis of what is found. So we've got a number of examples up on our website. We've just published the one most recently for those in the cancer community on HPV testing for cervical cancer screening. And that one is an example of how CADTH looked to the published literature. And then moving on in terms of, so for each of our different committees, we do have a public or a patient member on each of those. They are fully active members of the committee. They have voting rights, they have responsibilities, they have tasks, they have the respect of their fellow committee members, and different committees have slightly different roles in terms of the information that's presented. The patient and public members for CDR and pCODR, they present the patient input to the committee, highlighting unmet needs, highlighting patient values, and commenting on how, commenting and inspiring other committee members to be able to reflect, well, how does the clinical trial data and the economic data reflect those patient needs and values. So I think it's perhaps a good time to pass over to Maureen to talk a little bit about her role.
Great. So thanks to the Canadian Cancer Survivors Network and Jackie and your team for inviting me. I've attended, I can't count all on my two hands how many webinars in the past couple of years. They're all free, and they've all been very interesting. So when Bill invited me, I thought, well, I just want to support this initiative, so you're kind of stuck with me. I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about something that I'm pretty excited about. So this year at the CADTH Symposium will be the 5th meeting that will bring together patient and public members from CADTH's 3 committees that are on the slide there, as well as provincial committees such as INES, Ontario, BC, a public member from Saskatchewan, and some people from, and a member from Alberta. It's quite interesting. 5 years ago, when I first started on Ontario Committee to Evaluate Drugs, Frank Gavin and I had a conversation and said, well, why don't we get these people together in Saskatoon if we're all there, and let's have a meeting and talk about our, common goals and the issues that we face. And that was a 1-hour meeting that was very early in the morning, I think at 7:30 or something, and we had people join in by teleconference. And from there, it's just grown every year. So now we're into a half-day workshop. What's great about it is that CADTH has supported the meeting, but has given the co-chairs of the meeting basically carte blanche to do what we deem to be necessary to help patient and public members do a really good job. So that's been very, very good. The meeting has changed over the years. So the past couple of years, we've brought in experts to do some training on issues that we've identified. And really the objective is for us to get together, exchange ideas, about how we can best ensure that the patient input is an integral part of the process. We've included the people in the device review committees, so it's very interesting. It's also very interesting to see across our country the different roles that people play and different processes. And it's an evolving field, as you know. Anyone who's trying to keep up with HTA, it's an evolving field. So we need to be current, and we're trying to do that. Like this year, for example, we're going to look at the recommendations of Sarah and her team's study on what the patient group said, and we're going to take a really good look at that and see, well, in our role as patient and public members, what can we do to really work with the recommendations that are out there. So even though we have differences in our roles and in the processes of a provincial or national group like CADTH, there are many similarities, and I think what we've discovered is that we have a common desire to really do the best job that we can, and the motivation, because the people that do sit on those committees realize how important it is and realize that patients are counting on them. And so it's that part I thought that people should know. It's not an open meeting, so you don't see it in the program, but I thought that patients would want to know that the people who are, fortunate enough to sit on these committees do get together to try to really do the best job that they can do. And now I'm going to give a little plug for the Ontario, because Bill mentioned I would say something about the Ontario Committee to Evaluate Drugs. I just want to say that in the last couple of years, we don't duplicate the CADTH reviews, and things have changed. We do a lot of formulary modernization, and we look at other drugs that are specific to Ontario for various reasons. But submissions are always welcome, and they're on the website. Like whatever we're reviewing is on the website. And it doesn't matter if it's a submission for a different formulation of a drug, whatever. If you think that a patient perspective is that you would like to provide a patient perspective, we will absolutely consider it. And there is a process, so there's still the same form that we're trying to revise. But I just want people to know that we're open for business. And though we don't do exactly the same kind of reviews that we were doing before, because we were duplicating, they're on the website. Everything is listed that we're going to be looking at, and you are more than welcome to send us patient submissions, and they will be an integral part of the discussion. So I'm going to stop there.
And we're gonna continue the webinar, but you mentioned that I want to get your perspectives on this, because some of the people who are calling in may not have an idea of what is involved in actually coming up with a patient submission, and you know, what are the four things: who you are, burden of illness. I don't know if this is an opportunity maybe to let people know who might not have that experience.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be able to say that probably the best place to go is to CADTH's website for, we have support available for patient groups, both if you're preparing input for the Common Drug Review or the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review. Both have tools to be able to say, you know, here it's a common template, but there are different types of support to be able to say, you know, these are different ways you can gather the information. These are ways to be able to answer the question. These are the parts that we want to ensure. This is why we ask about conflict of interest. This is why we ask about how you gathered your information. But also for groups to feel that if they have specific questions, you know, our contact details, myself, Tamara, others are happy to answer questions, to have specific cases, concerns, questions as groups are preparing the info.
Excellent. And there are many people probably on the line, and I should take this opportunity too to encourage people to ask questions. There's a box in your GoToWebinar panel that you can post some questions. There's almost two stages. So a lot of the patient organizations, they're going to field with either surveys or focus groups or other methods to try to gather that information. So a lot of people on the line will get this opportunity to write into SurveyMonkey to talk about, you know, all of this. And then there's the people within the patient organizations who have to compile it and then put it into a submission and then submit it. That sort of the creation of that product or that input, there's a lot of work that goes into that. So it's great that there's a lot of support at CADTH, and that people like Maureen will end up with that input at the end and then have to present it. So you know, just get your questions ready. This is your opportunity to ask live on a webinar, but also, you know, Maureen, you're around too. There's a real cadre of patient leaders who are very good at this, including the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, which regularly gathers this data and makes patient inputs themselves. So if any of you have other questions, in addition to the CADTH website, there's some really good peer support among the patient community. So I just wanted to emphasize that too.
Yeah,
for what it's worth.
And if I can just add for Ontario, for example, if you see something that's posted, you know, ask yourself, well, have we submitted something similar to this for CADTH that can be used? So if you've done a study on burden of disease, you know, there's no reason why you can't cut and paste that and put it into a submission for Ontario. So you really should be looking at what you've done, you know, for CADTH, and what could then be tailored to maybe look at a specific request from Ontario. And we see that all the time. People have figured out that, you know, you don't reinvent the wheel. If we've done some good work and you've already, you know, gone to your membership and surveyed them, that, well, that information can be very valuable, and even if it's not the same drug, well, just that burden and that unmet need and the patient preferences that you've discovered should all be, you should be able to move that into another submission. And we really encourage you to really look at that and to not see the provincial ones as a separate submission. Just kind of look at it as a continuation, and perhaps there are things that you can reuse, because it's a lot of work to come up with it. And you'll see that the questions are very similar. So we're looking for the same kind of input, right? So you're not going to get a whole slew of questions that are completely different from the Ontario. It may be worded, the sections might be a little bit different, but basically we're looking for the same thing. So you should really be encouraged that when you see it online and you see it on the website, think, you know, well, is there something that we could actually, you know, submit, and without having to go out and doing a whole new process.
So Maureen, just building on that, and then we'll pass it back to Sarah to actually show you some websites where you can get more information. I think that's your next slide, if I'm not mistaken.
Good.
A few more slides, and we'll keep on going. But the exact, what is in a patient input is who you are and some conflict of interest information if you've received funding from the sponsor of the drug, your experience with the disease itself and the burden, your expectations or experience with the drug that's under review. Are those the three main?
They're kind of the main points. So also an important aspect is how you gather the information. Okay. Is that, is it a collection of families who are talking about their lived experience, or was it a survey? And then, if you're talking with individuals who've had lived experience with the drug under review, recognize most cases the drug won't be in Canada yet. So have those experiences come from people who are involved in the trial? Have they come from people in different countries? Because, of course, in different countries, you've got different healthcare settings. If they're in trials, it's quite different from what it might be like when it's here in Canada. So understanding often some of that context around the input that comes in is also really, really valuable. And just even building on what Maureen was saying, that, oftentimes, just in the nature of how drugs come to CADTH, it's the company who is saying, yes, I'm trying to seek public reimbursement, so they put together their application and the trial data. So it may be that, we have a whole range of drugs, one after another, in a certain disease area, which we recognize is a real challenge for patient groups to, in 6 months, put together 3 submissions or 4 submissions. CADTH certainly does not expect those submissions to be different, radically different, or even different at all, unless, of course, you've got rapid change to the treatment landscape. We still expect that people, their experience of disease, their experience of treatments that are currently available and being widely used in Canada, their expectations for what would different look like, what would improved look like from what we've already got, to be very similar over time, unless you're having a radical change. So those ones could be the same submissions. We will not go, we read this before, because often it's a different review team. We're using that information to look at different clinical trials, different economic models. So that's fine to be using that same information again and again. Recognize that, so many groups are doing this with volunteers out of whatever funding they have. We do recognize that patient groups put a lot of work into these submissions. So don't feel they have to be different. Don't feel that we'll think any less of them if it's not something brand new and shiny this time.
Are you also saying, Sarah, and then we'll get on with it with the slides, that don't let perfection get in the way of actually providing input?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So if you can only answer 1 or 2 of the elements, I think, Maureen, you mentioned the burden of illness. If that's your contribution,
exactly.
Focus on that. If you've got experience with the clinical, trials on a new oncology drug, you can get into that. But if you don't have that, then share your experience. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly. CADTH, we're trying to have it very open in terms of, where we want to hear diversity of experience. We want to hear different insights. So please feel, work with others if that work, to put in joint submission if that's helpful. But don't feel it needs to be a perfect submission. Share some of, thoughts.
And if you don't actually get a submission on a product that is in let's say a really important therapeutic area, and would you actually go out and talk to patient groups and say, look, is there any proactive outreach, or is it always a submission opportunity open, come to us?
At the moment, we have an open call for patient input submission, and then when we do have rare occasions where we do not get input, most of those times we look and see, do we have a similar disease area, a similar drug that we can pull insights from. Unfortunately, sometimes it has to be highlighted. We don't have any at the moment, and certainly that is rare. But I've noticed over the years that when that comes to the committees are kind of like, oh, we don't have any. Oh, and there's certainly a disappointment there. But
webinars like today will prevent that from happening. So there's my segue back into the slide deck. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I've talked a little bit about how to be involved, and then this is our more formal framework. This is a little bit more focused on process. So it sets out why CADTH engages with patients and families, and with a bit more of a focus on how CADTH engages and whom. So we recognize that, you know, we do things a certain way. How does that compare nationally, internationally? So what we did with this is we looked at the Health Technology Assessment International, their patient and citizens interest group, a number of years ago, set about what are those values and standards. So what we did is we took those values and standards, and you can see that on the left-hand column here, and we looked at, well, how do we put those in action at CADTH? So we did it over 3 ones. One is kind of your values, why engage patients, how do we put that in an action? Then standards for individual assessments, as well as the process for assessments. And CADTH was really quite critically honest. We looked at, well, this is what we're doing, but here are some areas that we could be meeting that standard better. We could be taking that value and going further with it. So I won't go into detail just in the interest of time, but this is all up on our website. And we recognize that, you know, we do meet the standards and we do align with the values, but that doesn't mean we couldn't do more. And then moving along, just a plug to highlight where all this information can be found. So the slides on being involved, highlighting the opportunity, also considerations if you want to do it but not sure of the time commitment, the pros and cons, and the outcome of that involvement, as well as the framework. And then, as mentioned, just to, in the fall, we spent quite a bit of time talking with different patient groups that have been involved with CADTH for a number of years. So that was a mix of cancer patient groups and non-cancer patient groups, large groups, small groups. And just myself and my colleague Tamara Rader, we spent some time talking with groups and kind of asking them, well, what could we do to be more engaged? What would that greater engagement look like? And how could we better support you to be more engaged? And we're also looking for some direction and thoughts about, you know, our plans for the Patient and Community Advisory Committee. What should we be considering as we're developing this? So this is a little snapshot of some of the things that we heard. So what does, you know, greater engagement look like? Well, really, that, you know, I think that's key, that meaningful engagement, that deep, long-term commitment, that respectful engagement. Also heard some of the things about needing that greater diversity and a little bit more specific support, some of that greater interaction will look like. Also student support, and in hearing a lot of these things, this is key for us in terms of working out, well, what's the work plan going to be for our new Patient and Community Advisory Committee, as well as these ideas are feeding into CADTH's business plan and future strategic plans. So there's some great ideas, and thank you for all the groups who took part in that, and lots of work for us to be able to get involved with. And then moving on, just in the interest of time, the Patient and Community Advisory Committee. So in those calls, we heard some direction, and one of the things we're really hearing about is greater diversity and what that might look like. So CADTH, we had nominations that opened at the end of January. We had it open for a month. For the first time, CADTH was doing Facebook advertising, and we were really, really happy with our response with that. And in the month that we had our nominations open, we had 85 people put themselves in, fill out the statement of interest, and we had patients and community members and caregivers from all across the country, from PI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. We had people across the prairies, somebody from Yukon. So it was really great to get that sense of pan-Canadian. And it was very interesting. We really looked at, you know, CADTH's strategic plan and looking at different vulnerable populations, so people with mental health addictions, people in rural areas, and I was really amazed at how many people were really brave in talking about their lived experience in these different areas and how they've built on that lived experience and how they want to continue contributing. So we had a team of 4 people. All the statements of interest were blinded, and they went through and looked at our criteria for what we're looking for our members, and that was the publicly posted criteria, ranking the submissions against those blinded, discuss them, and then we've pulled that into a shortlist that we're going to be setting up interviews, and we're hoping to have those interviews complete and on our 12 members by the end of this month. So busy month for CADTH.
Sounds like a jury.
12 is a good round number. We're trying to, that'll include the chair. But the mandate of that is going to be very much, you know, providing advice. Anything that falls under CADTH's mandate is, you know, is something that can be involved from the perspective of those using the healthcare system. So we've got some broad terms of reference, and the details of that are going to really depend on the work plan as we get those committee members and we have opportunities come through.
Excellent.
So that was my last slide. We may have some questions.
So let's go to the Q's and A's, and we've got 2 that have come in from folks, and one of them is around the other reviews at CADTH. So one of your earlier slides, Sarah, had rapid reviews, et cetera. You also do work for Canadian Blood Services, and some aspects of those reviews. There was one person asking, is there an opportunity to provide input to some of the services that you provide to other decision makers besides the ones that you mentioned earlier?
CADTH at the moment is working, you know, our engagement covers what the CADTH process is. So we certainly share our experiences with other organizations, but, you know, we work with the established processes that we have.
My understanding is that you provide some, like, the economic analysis for Canadian Blood Services on blood products, and that they will make decisions on. However, they're not going into the established services that have the formal patient input submission. So.
Correct. So, I mean, as I explained in some of our device work, where it's more like a patient partner model, like there are different ways to be able to gather patient perspectives or have patients work. At the moment, our patient input process, you know, is clear to the programs that we have. So if something comes through a program we have, then we have the processes in place. But I don't have, you know, other projects, it's more dependent on that project and the protocol and how that works.
Of course. A question for Maureen. You're sitting around a table, a relatively big board table with, you know, up to 10 other members, most of whom are either economists or clinicians. Are they sometimes speaking a different language, the one that you're trying to interpret from the patient input? And how do you marry the two? I mean, we've both seen, you know, Durhan present. This is what they, you know, we say as patients, and this is what they hear as either clinicians or economists. Are you playing a translating role between those two worlds? And can you talk about that a bit?
Well, yeah, you're basically trying to make sure that the patient perspective is out front and center. And you're right, sometimes you are speaking a different language. And so the patient member has to be willing to just stop everything and say, whoa, I don't really understand that, or I'd like an explanation of how that's going to, the effect it's going to have on patients. So, but I find that, I've been on the committee for almost, 5 years this month actually, and it's certainly, there's a steep learning curve. And when you first start, you're just kind of overwhelmed by everything. And then as you begin to gather more experience, you're more able to participate in the deliberative dialogue and find the areas where you're not speaking the same language. But it's not easy to do, and it takes some time, and that's why on these kind of committees, you don't roll everyone off at the same time. You have people who are more experienced, and then you bring in new people. And I know pCODR has like an extra member who's kind of like almost like a member in training.
Patient alternate.
Exactly, an alternate, and so there's a process to not allow, you know, people to be alone and to be faced with all that, because it's really important that we speak the same language, and often the patient member has to really clarify what the patient is trying to say, what are the values that they're trying to explain, and then work with the other members to make sure that those values are really clear. But then you also have to listen to what they're saying and try to bring that back into the conversation, and just that's why it's called a deliberative dialogue. That's what it really is. It really is a dialogue. So it's not I talk, you listen, then you talk, I listen. There really is a negotiation process that goes back and forth. And that part is really important. Like I think the patient submissions are extremely important, and they frame everything, and then the patient member has to really be active to make sure that those submissions aren't lost.
And just to add on that, I mean, I provide part of an orientation to our new members that come on for the Common Drug Review Expert Committee, all of the new members, and we talk about patient input and their, you know, the role of the technical members too, to be able to be listening to that and commenting on that and making sure that that patient voice is heard. So it's not only the hat of, you know, the public, any one member, and that is something I do see that all of the committee members do listen to and contribute and hear.
Yeah, well, even since I started, there's been more highlighting of, it's not just the patient members who need training, it's the rest of the committee who needs training, and there's been a lot more light shed upon, well, how are they receiving, how are the other committees receiving that, and research studies being done on it, and all kinds of things happening to really, because it's a two-way street, so you can't just be training patients, you have to really work with the whole system. And I think we've made some leeway, like I think we've advanced in that sense, and in the last 5 years anyways, I see a difference from when I first started. And I think the dialogue on the patient input is really very important now, and has taken center stage, whereas we didn't discuss it as much before. It was there, but because, as I'm sure Sarah will agree, you can't evaluate it.
Can we give an example about that? Like, let's say cancer, for example, a quality of life issue, if you're on certain chemotherapy, might be hair loss or other impacts that are what, from a clinical perspective, might be considered somewhat superficial to either shrinking or eliminating a tumor in the body. But how does that quality of life potentially potentially resonate to either clinicians or in a health economic world? Is that a good example of the kind of thing you say someone would look back to what Maureen said about that, how important something like that was to this input? Is that an example of what would come up for you?
Certainly. I mean, a lot of what patients and the patient input can tell us is, well, what is the impact? What is the consequence? What does this mean? What does this look like? So it doesn't become, a statement and a number. It translates as to, well, what is the knock-on effect of this? My sister had cancer treatment at 15, and if 15-year-old adolescents, hair loss is a big deal in terms of your self-image. But, some of that is understanding that context.
Thank you. A question from, I never say, I used to say who's actually asking the questions. I don't do that anymore because this is a webcast and archived now. But a lot of good feedback on the presentation. Wanted to know just a little bit about the difference between the expert committee and the patient community advisory committee. So the expert committee, like I mentioned, who sort of is on that, but maybe you can provide a little bit more background there, Sarah. And then the other committee, is it just going to be patients and community members?
So our expert committee, so CADTH expert committees, our 3 committees, they're the ones who take the evidence for a specific assessment, so a drug assessment or a medicine, device, and they're the ones who deliberate that and make a recommendation on its use. The advisory committee, for the Patient and Community Advisory Committee, is a little like some of the other advisory committees that CADTH has, that gives us advice in terms of how we develop our processes and different areas that fall under CADTH's much broader work. With our patient and community advisory, we're keeping that very, very broad. It's not specific to a drug program or the device program. It's all of CADTH's work, and the actual tasks of that group are going to be developed as we kind of get on, but we're giving the groups a number of different tasks for them to be able to provide advice to CADTH, and then CADTH, in some instances, may be able to implement that advice. Other times, we may not be able to.
Okay, excellent. We just have a couple minutes left before the hour. Any final thoughts to leave listeners with, or ideas for see everyone in Edmonton? But any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that this is patient engagement. It's like a growing field, but really want to thank all of the people who are who often do it with their volunteer time and their hours to be able to contribute, who want to say, I want to share my experience, I want to make it better for others. So thank you for investing that time and sharing those insights.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the patients who are on the webinar. The last time we had the one about getting involved with CADTH, I said health technology says it wasn't the most exciting area, which is I still agree with that, but it's extremely important. And if this is your first webinar or your first time that you're looking at getting involved in that, don't be discouraged. It seems really complicated, and there's a lot of pieces to it, but if you're really interested, you can learn about it gradually, and you get more and more involved, and it's really important. So I just want to encourage anyone who's thinking like, oh God, health economics, but it really, for the patient input part of it, is of utmost importance. So thank you for even, making the attempt to get involved.
Excellent. So back to you, Alison, to close us out, and just I'll take the opportunity to just thank Sarah and Maureen for taking the time out of your afternoon to come, and if you want to try to find us at the CADTH Symposium, please do so, and find, Sarah, you're so open to meeting with new patient groups. Let's grow that number from 140 to 200. Because I think there was somebody did a little analysis. There's almost 600 registered health charities or patient organizations in Canada. So, these are great opportunities to reach more people, to get more people involved. So thank you both.
Thank you.